My name is Meg Perret, and I'm a graduate student at Harvard History of Science. This talk is titled Nature Divided, Scientists United, Imagining Multispecies Futures in the U.S.-Mexico Borderlands. I analyze an emerging coalition of immigrants, scientists, conservationists, activists, and artists who imagine the future of human migrant groups as inextricable from the preservation of biological diversity in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. I completed analysis of scientific, political, and cultural discourses about the border wall construction from 2005 to 2020 and conducted 6 oral histories with biodiversity scientists working in the region. In this talk, I argue that this alliance provides a distinctive political vision for the environmental future of the borderlands in which human and non-human communities flourish together beyond the historical wounds of borders and binaries. In 2005, Congress passed the REAL ID Act, which authorized the Department of Homeland Security to waive all legal restrictions in order to expedite the construction of border barriers as part of Bush's War on Terror. Days after taking office in 2017, Trump issued an executive order to begin construction of a continuous border barrier. The Department of Homeland Security used the legal waiver granted by the REAL ID Act to bypass more than 40 environmental and human rights protections, such as the Endangered Species Act, Safe Water Drinking Act, and the Native American Religious Freedom Act. This alarmed conservationists because the borderlands is a biodiversity hotspot that supports many endangered species found nowhere else in the world. The irony is that the wall only slows people illegally immigrating by an average of 5 minutes. While conservative political discourse poses white America as a, quote, endangered species due to Latino immigration, conservation biologists and field ecologists have been outspoken that Trump's big beautiful wall is itself environmentally disastrous. A 2018 Bioscience article titled, quote, Nature Divided, Scientists United, finds that the border wall would doom over 94 endangered species to extinction. As a result of binational collaboration, the paper has nearly 3,000 signatories of scientists in Mexico, the U.S., and elsewhere. As lead author of the article, Dr. Robert Peters, a senior scientist at Defenders of Wildlife, told me that for conservation biologists, the border wall symbolizes the broader threat of habitat fragmentation, which could be the leading cause of species extinctions. Habitat fragmentation isolates populations, restricts gene flow, and makes endangered species more susceptible to extinction. Top predators that require large range sizes in the American Southwest would be cut off from populations in Mexico. Many of these iconic species, such as the jaguar, will go extinct in the U.S. if the border wall is completed. Border militarization also degrades local habitat through noise pollution, human foot traffic, and off-roading of Border Patrol vehicles. These threats are exacerbated by climate change that causes regional droughts and shifts species ranges. Border militarization has also directly hampered biodiversity science. Conservationist Sergio Avila told me that he experienced racial profiling while researching jaguar conservation in the borderlands. Border Patrol would continually harass him, impede his crossing of the border, and interfere with his ability to conduct his research. He was even held at gunpoint by a Border Patrol agent despite providing documentation of his education and employment as a biologist. He left the scientific research community out of fear for his life. In his current job at the Sierra Club, he educates the public about the seasonal migration of monarch butterflies from Mexico through the U.S. to Canada. He says, quote, "Migration is a natural process, and the border wall is an unnatural barrier." Visual artist Lauren Strohacker created a public art installation at the border wall titled "Unfragmenting or Desfragmentado." The digital art projection overlaid larger-than-life images of Borderlands species on the slating of the border fence. The images are from motion-triggered cameras belonging to the conservation group the Northern Jaguar Project. As a community engagement artist, Strohacker projected the wildlife images simultaneously on both sides of the border fence in collaboration with the cities of Agua Prieta and Douglas. The fragmentation of the images by the surface of the border wall symbolizes the literal fragmentation of animal populations from border wall construction. Conservation photographer Krista Schuyler depicts the diversity of people and wildlife in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. Contrary to media representations that depict the borderlands as a militarized wasteland, her photography depicts the beauty, tenacity, and inventiveness of borderlands inhabitants. Her most popular images capture the moment in which the movement of people and wildlife are directly limited by the border fence, thereby showcasing the reality of habitat fragmentation. In her 2019 documentary film, I, Mariposa, depicts the migration of monarch butterflies alongside women activists fighting for environmental and social justice. The film highlights the journey of Zuelma Hernandez as she migrates from Mexico to the U.S.
A mí siempre me ha encantado la naturaleza, especialmente las mariposas, porque a mí me gustaría ser tan libre como ellas.
The film creates a parallel structure that juxtaposes the life cycle of monarchs as they transform from caterpillars to butterflies, and the personal transformation of this migrant woman as she becomes an advocate for her community of migrant workers in the U.S. The film also documents the efforts of women conservationists to halt the construction of the border wall through the National Butterfly Wildlife Center in Texas, which is crucial habitat for endangered butterflies.
One who would not be upset with that prospect of having their life's work undone, to destroy thousands of acres of public and private lands,
¿Dónde va a quedar toda esta mariposa?
condemn thousands of wildlife species, and create a barren, no man's land behind an artificial barrier. There was no border wall in South Texas. There was only levee fencing.
Latinx activist, artist, and storyteller Fabiana Rodriguez drew a series of protest posters titled "Migration is Beautiful" that uses images of migratory monarch butterflies to demonstrate that movement with the seasons is inevitable and natural. Her images depict the figures of women within butterflies' wings. The image of the butterfly is an accessible means to reimagine borders as permeable rather than militarized. As she writes, quote, "We belong to nature, and nature has no borders." Since then, the butterfly has emerged as an international symbol of migrant rights. Rodriguez has collaborated with queer artist Julio Salgado. His art depicts himself as a butterfly with bilingual text on the wings. The image draws on cultural connotations between butterflies and queerness in Mexican and Mexican American communities. The word for butterfly in Spanish, mariposa, is slang for gay men. This image has become an icon of the undocuqueer movement, of undocumented queer youth or dreamers in the U.S. Jess X. Snow is a queer migrant Asian American artist whose protest posters titled "Migration is Natural" depicts migrants and animals crossing the borderlands. Her artwork went viral in 2017 as part of the hashtag #NoBanNoWall social media campaign against Trump's construction of the border wall. Her artwork employs aesthetic slippages between migrant and animal bodies to depict the circular, natural, and ancient interdependency of human and animal migration across the artificial borders of nations. In the image on the right, she depicts queer interracial lovers entwined in an embrace, surrounded by butterflies, hummingbirds, and constellations. The butterflies and birds spill over from one person to the other at places where their bodies meet. A stream of butterflies flies downwards over the border wall as if they are messengers of the new world without borders that rises from the ashes of the inflamed border wall. In conclusion, scientists, conservationists, activists, and artists use endangered migratory species such as jaguars and monarch butterflies as emblems of resistance against border wall construction. Scholars in Latinx environmentalisms argue that art, activism, and culture can bring about new decolonial environmental imaginaries and thus enable new futures for people and the environment. In the context of the increasingly fragmented and militarized borderlands, this entails reconceptualizing the landscape in terms of entangled relationalities of care and interdependence. As argued by both Chicana feminists and ecofeminists, liberation must begin with the rejection of binary logics that separate human from animal, nature from culture, male from female, and Mexican from American. In the words of Latinx activists, quote, "We didn't cross the border crossed us." Thank you.